All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Fierceness of the Mother Global Conference, in which we are going to engage in powerful conversations with both women and men to reveal and restore the ancient feminine ways of knowing. This event is designed to open up space for all of us to reinstate the principle of the continuance of life as our top priority. Here you are invited to tune into the guidance from the feminine force of creation and learn how this force can be used to revolutionize and revitalize our world. I am your host for this event, Jocelyn Mercado, and today I am very excited and honored to be speaking with John Perkins. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Jocelyn. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being a part of this event. And so let me go ahead and share your bio with everybody. John Perkins focuses on transformation, personal, communal, and global. He was chief economist at a major international consulting firm where he advised the World Bank, United Nations, Fortune 500 corporations, and the US and other governments. A leading authority on shamanism, he learned about the power of using perceived reality to change objective reality from Amazon shamans, and then with other shamans on 5 continents. He has used shamanic practices to help individuals, corporations, universities, and governments. His books have sold more than 1 million copies, spent over 70 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and are published in more than 30 languages. He has lectured at Harvard, Oxford, and more than 50 other universities. And he has been featured on ABC, NBC, CNN, CNBC, NPR, A&E, and the History Channel. In addition to his New Confessions of an Economic Hitman and other nonfiction books on global intrigue, he has authored 5 books on indigenous cultures and transformation, including Shapeshifting. He is a founder of Dream Change and, along with Bill and Lynn Twist, the Pachamama Alliance, nonprofits dedicated to creating a regenerative, peaceful, and thriving world. He was awarded the Lennon Ono Grant for Peace in 2012. And John, I'm so excited to talk with you about your topic for today, which is touching the Jaguar. And so could you begin by sharing with us, what do you mean by this when you say touching the Jaguar?
Yes, Jocelyn, I love the expression. For me, it goes back to when I was a Peace Corps volunteer deep in the Amazon, 1968 to 71. And I was living with the Shuar people, who were infamous at the time for shrinking the heads of their enemies, which sounds gory, but it's actually a very, very sacred ceremony they do. It's honoring their enemies, if you can believe that. It's a different story. But anyway, at one point I got very, very sick. I was dying. I couldn't leave because it was a long, long walk out of the rainforest to the nearest road, where if I was lucky, I could find a rickety old, what they call a chicken bus. And if I could find one, it would take another 2 days to get to the nearest medical facility. There was just no way I could do that. I was really resigned to dying. And then the school teacher in the town who I was working with, one of the few people I could communicate with, brought this shaman up to me, an elderly guy, and said, he can heal you tonight. And the shaman looks at me and he says, yeah, I can. He said, he looked at me, he said, you're dying. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, well, I could heal you tonight. And he did. And the way he did that was through a shamanic journey. And in this case, he used what has become quite popular in the United States and elsewhere now, ayahuasca, this plant. At the time, I'd never heard of it. I don't think anybody outside of the Amazon had ever heard of it. But during that journey, he urged me to touch the Jaguar. And what happened on that journey was that I saw that I'd been raised in a family of very hygienic New Englanders, New Hampshire. I grew up, and also we ate extremely bland, mild foods. Now I'm living with people who've never seen a bar of soap, and they ate some very strange foods, in my way of thinking, very strange foods. And they drank something called chicha, which is a kind of beer made by the women chewing manioc root and spitting it, and then it ferments. And they do that because they know the rivers are polluted with organic matter from the forest. And you can't drink water unless it's been mixed with an alcohol. So they make this alcohol. But on that journey, that shamanic journey, I saw that every time I drank this chicha or ate these foods, I'd hear a voice over my shoulder, probably my mother or someone saying, "It'll kill you." And I also saw that the the Schwa people are very, very healthy. You know, the men are all built like Tarzan, and the women. I was in my early 20s, so the women were looking really good. And some of the people live to be very old if they're not killed in hunting accidents or something. So on this journey, I saw that it wasn't the food and drink that was killing me. It was my perception, my mindset. And as I'm in this journey, I keep hearing the shaman's voice saying, "Touch the jaguar, touch the jaguar." And what they mean by that is that we mustn't run from that which we fear. We must go out and touch it. So I actually saw a jaguar on that journey, and a vision of a jaguar. And what the jaguar was this fear that I had that came from a mindset. So I had to touch my own mindset basically and change it. And I did it that night. So that was my first introduction to this idea of touching the jaguar, which really means we must go into that which we most fear and touch it. Because if we run from it, it'll just chase us. If I kept running from that, awakening myself to where the sickness really came from, which was my mind, if I kept running from that, it would keep chasing me and I would keep getting sick and probably would have died. So, it was an amazingly enlightening moment. And it has more pertinence today since we've been, every year, Bill and Lynn Twist and I, 3 co-founders of the Pachamama Alliance, take a group to the Amazon, some of our major supporters. The organization takes a number of groups if anyone who wants to go. But we do that, and it's coming up in a few weeks in August. The indigenous people, we now work a lot with the Achwa and the Zapata, as well as the Shwa and the Quichua. All of them have this belief that you can't run from danger, you must touch it. And one of the reasons they asked to form a partnership with us to create the Pachamama Alliance back in 94, 95, was because they said, we've always been at war with each other, these different tribes. Now we call them nations. They are nations, because we felt that in order to protect our hunting grounds, we had to fight our enemies. But now we understand that there's a much bigger threat, and that's from your oil and mining companies. So we've all come together. People who've been traditional enemies for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, come together to protect their territory from this one big enemy, which is the oil and mining companies. And then shortly after that, they began to understand, well, no, the real enemy is your dream in the north that promotes mining and oil exploration. So we need to partner with some of your people who we most fear. It's you who we fear. And it's not just your companies, it's also your perception of the world, which is highly materialistic and destructive. And so we founded the Pachamama Alliance, and their story always was, that's the jaguar. You are the jaguar. We fear you. We fear your culture. We fear your dream, your perception. So we've got to go out and touch that. And you're beginning to understand you fear it too, that it's destroying your world also. It's destroying the whole nest, which is the earth, our mutual territory. We've all got to come together to touch that jaguar, which is our fear of change, really.
Wow, very powerful. Thank you. It really makes me think of the state of our world, just feels like things are falling apart on all levels between climate, environment, and then political, social structures. Everything is at such a, time of a catalyzing time, a chaotic time, however we might want to name that. So I wonder, what are the fears that you might see that we hold as humanity, as human beings, that we can really, that we need to touch, that we need to go into in order to heal and change the state of our world?
Yeah, another thing that one of the shamans more recently told a group that I had taken in to the Amazon. No, actually, I'm sorry. This was a Kogi shaman from Colombia. I also take groups of the Kogi and the Maya every year. 3 different people, 3 different groups. And this Kogi shaman, when someone asked, what can we what can we do to stop climate change? And they're very aware of this because the glaciers in these high mountains where they live in Colombia are melting rapidly. They're very in touch with the earth. Kogi shamans have to train by living in caves as young people for about 10 years or so, being very close to the earth, listening to the earth, talking to the earth, feeling the earth. And he said, well, climate change isn't the problem. That's just a symptom. And the real problem is your belief that you must maximize short-term material gains. Corporations maximize short-term profits, regardless of social and environmental costs. We're all taught in a way to maximize our short-term material gains. That's part of our education. And he saw this, and he said, you know, when a child cuts himself and it scabs over, does he blame the cut or the scab for creating itself? No, he understands that he has to be more respectful to the knife. And we are now hearing this very strong warning from the earth, and we must be respectful. And what the earth is telling us is that our whole perception, our mindset, if you will, is of how to live is ultimately destroying the world as we know it. And they talk about it as being our dream. And then the dream is not just the nighttime dream. It may involve that, but it's also hope and expectations. It's our perceptions of who we are. And that's the problem and that's the problem of the migration problems, the climate change problems, the war, the antagonism. It all stems from this idea that we have to accumulate a lot of material wealth. And in the process, destroying the world, destroying the resources upon which we ultimately depend. And so the Jaguar is our fear of change. People around the world are waking up to the fact that we have to change. We're getting it. I'm headed to the Czech Republic tomorrow to give a speech there at a major music festival of over 50,000 young people. You know, it's great that they're listening, you know, because when I was that age, Woodstock, it was drug, sex, and rock and roll, and I'm sure that all still goes on. But now there's also these stages where people speak about things that are very, very serious and important, and people come in here. They take time out from the music, and they come in and they listen. And all over the world, people are waking up to the fact that we have to change. But the Jaguar is that fear of change. And, you know, a lot of us are pretty comfortable, you know, the way we live. And so even though we may talk to change, it's hard for us to really want to change because we live well. And then more than half the world's population doesn't even have the luxury to think about change. All they can think about is putting food on the table for the next meal, for their kids and themselves. And then there's this small group at the very top that are absolutely convinced that this is just the right way. They're rich. They've gone to business school, whatever. They've been taught this is the right way. Short-term profits is the right way. Short-term benefits, materialism. And so the Jaguar is the fear of change by all these different groups, or in one group, the inability to even have time to think about change. We have to touch that Jaguar. We have to recognize that we've got to change if we want our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to have a world that anybody would want to inherit, and not just for people, but for the animals and the plants, for the environment, for the mother.
Yeah. Yeah. And so do we have the power to change reality? What do you believe, and how? And if so, how can we?
Oh, we absolutely have the power, and we've done it so many times throughout history. You know, there've been so many revolutions. You know, the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, not just the revolutions like the American Revolution that are fought on battlefield, but revolutions that are fought in the mind and through science and so forth. You know, Copernicus changed everything when he exposed the idea that the universe didn't revolve around the Earth. We revolve around the sun, along with many other planets, and the sun revolves around the Milky Way. That changed religion. It changed everything very, very rapidly. And, you know, we've seen huge changes here in the United States over gender issues just within the last 10 years. When I was growing up, you know, nobody admitted that they were gay. You know, you just didn't admit it. and when I was in high school, and you certainly there was never even any talk about gender transformation. You know, we just that wasn't even conceived of. I think it had occurred at one point with one person, but I wasn't aware of it at the time. And just within the last 10 years, so much has changed in that regard. We are very capable of change. I'm often reminded, I love history, and the American Revolution has always been important in my life, partly because I grew up in areas that were very instrumental in that, Massachusetts and New Hampshire and that area. And I'm often think about how in 1774, basically everybody in America believed that the British were invincible, the strongest army in the world. George Washington went before the Second Continental Congress, and he mixed with the delegates there. He didn't openly speak outwardly. He mixed with the delegates, and he kept pointing out that 20 years earlier, he'd been in the French and Indian War at the Battle of the Monongahela. He'd been with General Braddock's army, and General Braddock at the time was considered the best British general in the world, and his army was the best. And they were defeated by a much smaller group of French and Indians. And so Washington went before the Continental Congress and he said, they're not invincible. All we got to do is stand behind trees. Change the whole perception of war. What, you mean we don't stand in these lines and just point at each other and shoot? Because we can't win. They knew they couldn't win that. We didn't have enough men. They weren't trained to do that. That the British were just overwhelming. But if they stood behind trees, they could win. It was a magnificent change of perception that ultimately changed everything. But throughout history, we can find so many examples that we're very, very, very capable of that. In fact, the very idea that maximizing short-term profits is the goal, regardless of the social and environmental costs, had been growing for many years, but it was really voiced very strongly by Milton Friedman in 1976 when he won the Nobel Prize of Economics. And President Reagan bought into it big time later, and Thatcher of England, and so many leaders around the world and corporate executives. That moment changed everything. We need another moment like that that changes us back to saying, no, the goal of business, the goal of life is to maximize long-term benefits for all of life, for the earth, for all of us. But you know, before Friedman said that, the idea had been growing and growing and growing about maximizing short-term profits. Von Heineken had won the Nobel Prize a couple of years earlier, said something very similar, and then it really caught on with Friedman. I think we're experiencing now this growing momentum toward change. There's a consciousness revolution around the world. People are waking up to the idea that we need to change. At the same time, the forces that don't want change, those at the top of this pyramid, are trying to stop it. And that's always the case in revolution. You know, once the revolution really gets going, as in the American Revolution, once the Sons of Liberty had the Boston Tea Party and really started momentum, the British, you know, tried to put on the brakes. We see that in every revolution, and it's happening now. The consciousness is changing, and at the same time, the Trumps of the world are trying to put on the brakes. The ones who want to protect the status quo.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I think around this topic of the mother, you know, I think it's clear that the earth is giving us stronger and stronger information that we need to change, you know, that we need to really step into a whole new perspective on how we're approaching life and our place in the world.
Yeah, you know, it's said that once you make a commitment to doing something, that the universe conspires to help you. And I believe that's true. I found that in my personal life. But I think that's what's happening today, that the earth is speaking very, very loudly. The glaciers are melting, the oceans are rising, there's a lot more fires and tornadoes and earthquakes. And Southern California just had this huge earthquake. And the plants. So this plant, ayahuasca, which, you know, helped me a lot back in 1969, is now emerging. The plant world is speaking to us also. I don't want to overstate ayahuasca because I think it's becoming a bit of too much of a fad, and I don't like that. It's a very sacred plant that should be used that way. But it's emerging. The plant world is emerging. People are taking interest. Vegetarianism is hugely on the rise. And so there is this conspiracy of the universe, I think. It's conspiring to help us move forward in this consciousness revolution. And that's truly beautiful. I'm reminded of a woman shaman in the high Andes, a Quechua woman who had a wonderful name of Maria Juana. And her last name was Yamberla, lived in the Ecuadorian Andes, high up. And I took a group there some years ago, and I'm translating. And somebody in the group said, "So Maria Juana, how can we save the earth?" She laughed and she said, "The earth isn't threatened. We humans are, and we take a lot of other species with us if we go. But so what? Like the dinosaurs were here, they went, who cares? Like they're still here in a way." She said, "Our children still love dinosaurs. The spirit's still there. There's a little dinosaur brain in the back of our head. They're still here in a way." And it was a failed experiment on the part of Pachamama, Mother Earth. If we destroy ourselves, basically, it'll be another failed experiment. The earth will go on. But she said, "Isn't this a fascinating time? Because we can listen. We can work with the earth." And she looked at me and she said, "John, you remember when this mountain, Imbabura, a sacred volcano right next to her home, you remember when there was a huge ice cap on this mountain just a few years ago, 20 years ago, and it's been melting ever since. It's not even there now. It's gone completely. Remember that?" And I said, "Of course." And she said, "Well, we're like so many fleas on Mother Earth. And if we get to be too much of a nuisance, she'll just shake us all off." And she's now twitching. She hasn't shaken us off yet, but she's twitching. She's sending us a signal, a lot of signals. And isn't it wonderful that we are capable of listening? And so it's our opportunity, it's to work with the earth, to change, to touch that jaguar, to change. And I think that's a very beautiful and eloquent way of expressing this. So absolutely we can change. And I think most of us have the will to change. The question now is, how do we make that happen? How do we get corporations to change? How do we get ourselves to change from having this obsessive desire to get more and more things in our life?
Yes. And so I'm curious as to what some of your thoughts might be on that. I know you've worked with, the financial and governmental side of things in different ways. So what are your thoughts on how we can help to create these major shifts that are needed?
It really revolves around consciousness. All these things that we do, like recycling and being aware of the foods we eat and solar energy, and so those are all important. But again, in a way, they're attacking the symptoms, which need to be attacked. If you got a cut, you need to put a Band-Aid on it. You need to take care of it. But then you got to look at, why did I get that cut? What happened? And so these are symptoms, and we need to do them. But at the same time, we need to really focus on how we change that perception of maximization of material benefits, short-term material benefits. And I think that's part of the process as we go into recycling, as we go into vegetarianism, and so on and so forth. It's important to emphasize that that's not the goal. That's just part of the goal. That's just a way to get to the goal. And it's important to let the corporations know that we're no longer going to invest in, we're no longer going to buy from those that do not embrace this goal. And so, if you have to have a pair of shoes and you decide that you're not going to buy from this company because it's not insensitive to its paying its employees a decent wage, or it's not sensitive to helping the environment, but this other company is doing a lot better job. You buy from the other company, and you send them an email or a Facebook post, and you let all your friends know, and you ask them to do the same thing, and to all their circles of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, you send out this message, and you let both of these companies know. One, you say, "I love your product, Nike or whatever, but I'm not buying it anymore until you, whatever, you pay your workers in Indonesia a fair wage, or you do something. But this other company you send a message to that you really appreciate the fact that they're struggling very hard to do a better job. And we have to recognize that probably nobody's exactly perfect these days, but we have to help those that are doing better. And so it's not just enough to shop consciously. We must express that and get it out to people. If we go back to the American Revolution, the single greatest factor, most historians believe, to turning people's attitude around, with Washington, with his statement, turned around some of the leaders, but the real catalyst was Tom Paine's writings, the Crisis particularly, which you really laid out an argument for why it didn't work to have a monarch, especially not one who was just inherited that position, regardless of how smart or stupid or a fool he was. It just passed down. And especially it didn't make sense to have one who was in England and we're in the United States. It was a very well laid out argument, but also written with great passion. And it was, a lot of people didn't read in those days, so it was read in taverns, in schools. Washington ordered it read to all of his troops at Valley Forge and other places. And that word, that spoken word, had a huge, huge impact. So I think we all need to understand in this time of social networking how important that can be. We hear a lot of negatives about social networking, and there are a lot of negatives, but there's also, we can use it in positive ways, and we all need to do that.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And I'm so glad you mentioned this, because we all do have this power to share the information, to make change, using the technology and using it for good, So yeah, thank you for that. And I'm also curious, what practices do you recommend? I know you lead people on retreats and journeys, and I'm sure you have different practices that you recommend on those, but what do you recommend for us as we are, wanting to heal, wanting to help up level our own personal consciousness so that we can then help the collective?
Well, yeah, personally, and when I teach workshops and so forth, I encourage people, if possible, to get out into nature. I jog and walk and meditate in nature every day, but I'm fortunate to be in places usually where I can do that. But even when I'm not, and for people who live in a high rise in a large city, to recognize that high rise is nature, that concrete and steel and glass all come from nature. They've been deeply processed by human beings, but we can relate to that. And so sitting in that space, just feeling your gratitude for what the earth has given you, including this building that you're in of concrete and steel and glass, that came from nature. The Mother Earth, the fierce mother, Pachamama, gave you this, and everything you have, the chair you're sitting in came from that, the food you eat. And to take time out every single day to feel that, to recognize it, to give gratitude toward it, and also to spend some time to really open your heart. So, there's this prophecy of the eagle and the condor that talks about how we have our minds, which is considered to be the eagle, and we have our hearts, which is the condor. And we've really separated them. And most of the world has really emphasized the ego side, the rational, the industrial, the scientific side, at the loss of the heart. And so, like indigenous people, we need to open our hearts more. Sometimes I have to teach them to open their minds more, because if you want to stop an oil company from coming into your territory, you better be able to present some statistics as to what the damage is. So it's the balance between the two. It's not that one's good and one's bad, it's the balance. And we've really lost the balance, most of us, in the societies that we live in. We're very mind-oriented. So for people to, in that process, to really allow their hearts to open, feel their emotions, feel their connection to the earth. And then everybody should take some action every single day. And it's going to be different for all of us. I'm a writer, so I write every day about these things, or I talk to you, or I go and give speeches, as I'm doing tomorrow in Europe. And that's what I do. But a plumber can use the best materials he can get his hands on, recycle things, etc., and talk to his clients and talk to them about the need to save water, about the need to respect these facilities that he's putting in. And a carpenter can do the same thing using materials that are recycled, that are trees that are grown with respect, and tell his clients, this may cost a little bit more in the short run, but you're making an investment in the long term. You're making an investment for your children and grandchildren. And somebody working in a clothing store can, really promote the clothes that are made with consciousness and good conscience, and tell people, it may cost a little more, but that's an investment. When you're not really paying your price, you're making an investment in the future. There's something every one of us can do. And I think taking some small action every day, that may just be sending out emails or Instagrams or whatever that promote these ideas, but we can all do something every day. And that feels so good, when you do that. And it's very powerful.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Thank you. There's one more thing I would love to ask you with the time that we have. I know you've mentioned a couple of times about plant medicines and sacred plant medicines. And do you, and you mentioned that it's becoming such a fad, and everybody's doing this, and maybe not all for the right reasons. So how can we use these medicines in a sacred way? And what do you recommend for people who are considering maybe engaging with plant medicines, but wanting to do this in a sacred way?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that everything that the plant medicine does, there's other ways to do it. Meditation. The Kogi, when we take people there in December, they're doing what they call pagamentos, payments to the earth, which you put a little piece of natural cotton, you give it to the earth or the water, or sometimes they just do air. It's the mindset that's important. It's that Jaguar we're touching, by giving back to the earth, and it's really about a feeling more than anything else. The Maya, who I take people to in January, do these amazing fire ceremonies that take you into an altered state that's as powerful as ayahuasca. It's different, but it's powerful. Mm-hmm. So I want to make it clear that it's not necessary to take one of these plants. There's many ways. The meditation that I do every day is powerful that way, the opening of the heart. However, I also love the plants. I think they can do a lot. But it's really important not to overdo it. So I was trained as an ayahuasca shaman. After that shaman saved my life, as payment, he demanded that I become his apprentice. I had no desire. I'd graduated from business school, and I'd never heard of a shaman before. I certainly never heard of ayahuasca. There was no future in it in those days. There is today, but there wasn't then. That's another way that things have changed so much. But he saved my life, so I became his apprentice, and later I apprenticed with shamans in many other cultures and countries. And it was always all about perception, how we change perception. It's all about that, just like psychotherapy is all about that. In a way, quantum physics is all about that. So this perception change is very important. How do we go deeper and deeper into this perception? And I think I've kind of lost the drift here of where we were going. So redirect me, help me get to the next step of this.
Yes, and no, that was very helpful. I was just curious what your thoughts are on how we can use those, those sacred plants in a sacred way, in a good way, and also access that level of consciousness in other ways too, as you've been speaking to.
Yeah, and as far as using the plants, well, if you're looking to do that, absolutely the best way, in my opinion, and the only way I've ever done it, is by going into the jungle where these things are have such a long history. You can be sure that it's being done sacredly by people who've done it for hundreds, thousands of years. But if that's not an option, you find someone in the States or Europe or wherever who is highly recommended by other people who've done it with him or her. Because I think there's some people here that are doing it very well. But I also have heard of people who mix ayahuasca with speed or LSD or something else, and I think that's a mistake. So you want to make sure you do it with someone who's highly recommended by people who've done it with him or her. And then, do it very infrequently. The plant tells us that once we've done this, we have to process. And we may think we've had this amazing experience, but it gets more and more amazing as the years go by. The last time I took it was, well, this last year I did a small amount, but I hadn't done it before that for 10 years because I'm still processing that. And the very small amount I took this last year was to help me continue that process. It's disturbing to me when people come up to me and they say, hey, I took ayahuasca 20 times last year. How many times did you do it? And I'm like, well, I didn't do it at all. I'm still working with what I did 10 years ago, And I think it's said that ayahuasca is not addictive. And I think probably from a physiological standpoint, psychological, it isn't. But it is addictive socially, I think, and maybe psychologically, that it becomes this thing where people, when they have ayahuasca parties, or they feel that they've got to keep going back and doing it, or they've had such a powerful experience the first time, they want to repeat that, and they almost always get disappointed because they've got to deal with it. So if you're going to do it, find somebody who's really good, who you can trust, and then do it infrequently. Let it do its work. Listen to it. Talk to it. Move forward. So ayahuasca is giving us a new perception, some new ideas, but it's important that we have those ideas, those perceptions impact our value system, and then that impacts our actions. So it's all about actions. Shamanism is all about helping people change their perceptions so they can change things in this material world. In my case, it was changing my perception so I could get to better health. But the shamans work with, how do we change the world around us? How does a writer, a carpenter, a teacher change their values and the actions that they take around those values? That's what the plant's all about. And that's what all these processes are all about. And we have to give them time.
Yeah, thank you for that. And this has been so wonderful talking with you and exploring these topics with you. Thank you so much for being a part of this event. And I know that you wanted to share with everybody an invitation to join your newsletter so that everybody can receive your updates and your latest offerings or retreats and what you're doing next. So for all of those listening, if you would like to do that, I highly recommend that you go and click on the link right below this video, and that will take you to John's website. And if you scroll down just a little bit on that page, you'll see the sign up form for his newsletter. And you can also find that at johnperkins.org.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Yeah, and thanks for all you do. This is so important to get this message out. And yeah, I'd love to have people. I speak at, I'm limiting myself a bit these days, but I do a lot of speaking around the country, and that also is listed on the newsletters. And I'd love to meet some of the people that we're talking to right now in person. And, I'd just like to end by saying I think we're blessed to be alive at this time. It's a very, very exciting time. Yes, there are challenges, but to have excitement, you got to have challenges, And we're at a time when we're really waking up to the importance of listening to Mother Earth, Pachamama, and taking her message to heart, and then taking the actions necessary to do what she's asking us to do. That's a great blessing, and we should feel how blessed we are to be at this time in history.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, and thank you
for— You're welcome. You're welcome. And again, thanks for all you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hope you have a wonderful day.
Likewise, thank you.